Ever wondered what really goes on behind the closed doors of a mental hospital? These aren't just stories. These are terrifying accounts from psychiatric nurses who've witnessed the unexplainable. Brace yourself for 5 creepy mental hospital horror stories that will haunt your mind long after the video ends. There's a kind of peace you expect in a psychiatric ward, at least. That's what you think before you've seen the real weight of things. When you walk through the doors, you brace yourself for the chaos, the unrest. But there are moments, quiet moments, when everything slows down and the world feels eerily still. That's how it was with Olivia. Olivia had been with us for months. She was a nonverbal patient, one of the most enigmatic individuals I'd ever encountered. Her history was long and complex. She had been through trauma, yes, but beyond that, we knew very little. She had been silent for as long as anyone could remember. She never spoke. She never responded to commands or questions. She didn't interact with anyone in any meaningful way, but she was also calm, in a way that was unsettling. Most of the time, Olivia would sit in her chair staring at the wall with those pale, unfathomable eyes. You couldn't tell what she was thinking. It was like she was in her own world, removed from everything around her. Nurses came and went, doing their rounds, checking on her. But Olivia didn't need much. She was harmless. I had grown used to her quiet presence, as had the rest of the staff. It was as if we all agreed that she was just there. No one expected much from her, and in return, she didn't ask much from us. But that all changed one evening. It was a Tuesday night, just like any other. I was finishing up my rounds when I came to Olivia's room. I had just passed by the other rooms. Nothing out of the ordinary. The usual. Some patients were asleep, others were still quietly going through their routines. But when I entered Olivia's room, something felt different. At first, I thought she was asleep. Her eyes were closed, her body still. But as I stepped closer, I noticed something that made my heart skip a beat. Her lips were moving. I stopped just at the door, unsure whether to approach or not. She had never spoken before, not a word, not even a sound. But here she was, murmuring something under her breath, something I couldn't quite make out. I stepped closer, my curiosity getting the better of me. I'd never seen her like this. I leaned in slightly, trying to catch the words. And then, clear as day, Olivia's voice rang out. Only it wasn't hers. It was deep, raspy, nothing like the soft tone I'd come to associate with her. The words were strange, as though they were being pulled from some distant place. And the voice, there was something about it that didn't sit right. It was as if it didn't belong in her body. Tick-tock, the time for you is almost up. I stepped back, my heart pounding. My hands suddenly felt cold. I didn't know what to make of it. Was it a hallucination? A side effect of her medications? I stood there, frozen, until Olivia opened her eyes and stared directly at me. Her gaze was intense, but her face was emotionless, calm. She didn't seem like the same person. There was something almost knowing in her eyes. "I know," she said in that same voice. "The end is near for you, and for him." I was caught off guard. The him she mentioned, was she referring to another nurse? Or me? I didn't respond. I couldn't. Olivia simply stared at me, her expression unreadable, before her lips parted again. "Tomorrow, the phone call. It will change everything." And then she fell silent again. Her eyes closed, her body relaxed. I stood in the doorway, unsure what to make of what had just happened. Was she simply delusional? Had she had a break from reality? Or had something more, something deeper, more inexplicable, just occurred? I left the room, shaken but trying to dismiss it. Maybe it was nothing. Nurses hear strange things sometimes, right? I brushed it off as a fluke, a brief moment of confusion. But the next day, I couldn't shake it. Olivia's words kept echoing in my head. Tick-tock, the time for you is almost up. The end is near for you, and for him. And then that phone call. I couldn't forget the way she said it, the way she knew. The day passed quietly, and I did my usual rounds. I was starting to feel like maybe it was all in my head when, just as Olivia had predicted, the phone rang. It was a call I'd been dreading, a call I had hoped would never come. It was from home. My mother had been battling cancer for months, and I had been preparing for the worst, but when I saw the number flash on my screen, I knew what it meant. The voice on the other end confirmed it. My mother had passed away. The shock of it hit me hard. The grief, the sudden, intense pain of loss. It was all too much. But in that moment, I couldn't ignore the fact that Olivia had predicted it. She'd said it the night before in that strange voice. The phone call, it will change everything. I couldn't explain how or why she knew, but I couldn't deny it either. Days passed, and the memory of that eerie prediction lingered in my mind. But the strangest part came a few weeks later, when another nurse, Jenna, approached me during shift change. "Olivia spoke to me last night," Jenna said, her voice quiet, almost hesitant. I didn't think much of it at first, but she told me things no one could know. Jenna paused, her eyes wide. She said, "The child will be lost. You'll have to say goodbye before the end of the year." I didn't understand it, not until this morning. I was frozen. My throat felt tight as Jenna went on. "I just found out my sister's pregnant. She's been having complications, and the doctors say they don't know if the baby will survive." I was silent, trying to process everything. Jenna's face was pale. I could see the fear in her eyes, the dread, because, like me, she had been caught in the web of Olivia's predictions. Some things happened after that. Strange things. All of us nurses started experiencing moments like these. Olivia would say things no one could explain, and as the days went on, more of her predictions began to come true. Things that were so specific, so real, that it was impossible to ignore. But no one could understand how. How could a nonverbal patient who had never spoken a word suddenly speak with such clarity? How could she know things about our futures before we did? As the weeks wore on, Olivia's predictions kept coming, sometimes more cryptic, sometimes more straightforward, and with each one that came true, the fear grew. We couldn't explain it, but we couldn't deny it either. And now, even as I sit here, I can still hear her voice echoing in my mind. "Tick-tock, the time for you is almost up." I don't know what Olivia was or what she knew, but one thing is certain: when she spoke, we listened. And maybe she wasn't just speaking to us. Maybe she was speaking from somewhere beyond. Hello, friends. Thank you for watching. A special shout out to our subscribers. You keep these eerie stories alive. But here's the thing, only 30% of viewers are subscribed. If you enjoy our content, hitting subscribe helps us more than you know. It takes a second, but makes a huge difference. While you're at it, like and share to keep the chills coming. Thanks again. You made this possible. See you in the next one, if you dare. It was an ordinary day, or so it seemed. The hospital, like any other, had its rhythm. Nurses moving through the halls, doctors checking on patients, and the constant hum of equipment keeping time. In a place like this, routine is expected. People come and go, treatments begin and end, but there's always a sense of stability, of familiarity. But sometimes in places where we least expect it, that sense of stability is shaken. It started with whispers, small, almost imperceptible. At first, no one took them seriously, but the stories grew. Patients, staff members, even visitors, everyone was talking about her. The nurse who looked just like Eunice. At first it seemed harmless, maybe even a little funny. "You know, I saw Eunice in the hallway just now," one of the doctors would say. "No, she wasn't there," a nurse would reply, shaking their head. "I just spoke to her, she's in the break room." Yet the claim was persistent. It wasn't until a few days later that we started noticing things weren't adding up. The first instance was a morning round. Eunice had been with her assigned patients on the 3rd floor, when one of the night shift nurses mentioned seeing her on the 2nd floor, talking to someone near the elevator. But when the team went to check, Eunice was still on the 3rd floor. "I swear, I saw her," the nurse insisted. "I thought she was on break or something." But Eunice wasn't on break. She was where she was supposed to be, and the nurse had been alone on the 2nd floor. A week went by. The stories spread further. Staff in the halls had noticed the same thing. A nurse who looked exactly like Eunice, but always somewhere she wasn't supposed to be. It wasn't just random sightings. People started seeing her in the most unexpected places. Eunice walking down the hall at the exact moment a patient was speaking about her. Yet, she wasn't there. Another time, someone claimed to have bumped into her in the elevator. But when they stepped off at their floor, there was no one there. I remember the first time I heard about it, I thought it was some kind of joke. a rumor that had been blown out of proportion. But then I started seeing it too. One evening, I was finishing my rounds when I saw her. That nurse. She was standing in the hallway looking down at a chart. She had Eunice's face, Eunice's posture, even her uniform, but when I walked up to her, she looked up and smiled, and I realized something felt off. "Eunice?" I asked, even though I knew she should have been on a different floor. She looked at me, her smile holding steady. "Just checking in," she said, and then turned and walked down the hall without another word. I couldn't shake the feeling. Something was wrong. The whole situation felt wrong. I made my way back to Eunice's usual station, but there she was, just as I had left her, speaking with a patient in the next room. Now, I'm not one to believe in superstition. I'm not one to make things out to be more than they are, but the coincidences were adding up. Too many for them to be dismissed as misidentifications. I've worked here long enough to know when someone is where they shouldn't be. I brought it up with the head nurse, and she shrugged it off. "It's just one of those things," she said. "Stress can do that to people. Maybe they're tired, maybe they're seeing things." But that didn't sit right with me. Nurses don't get confused like that. We're trained to know who's where and what they're doing, and Eunice had been the one who'd been seeing her the most, this doppelganger. Eunice is the one who first saw her in the hallway late one night. "It's like she was following me," Eunice said, her voice a little shaky. I turned around, and there she was, just standing there. I thought it was just me, but I swear, she looked exactly like me. No one else had seen her in the moment, but the next morning, I went back to Eunice's unit. There was something different about the atmosphere now. A tension in the air. Everyone was on edge, almost expecting to see her, this stranger who wore Eunice's face. Days turned into weeks, and still, no answers. The nurse, the doppelganger, kept appearing at the most random times. Sometimes it was in the middle of a busy shift, other times in the silence of the early hours of the morning. And just when you thought you could forget about it, she'd be there, watching, smiling. But the strange part, the part that gnawed at me, was that no one could ever find her. She'd always disappear before you could approach her. No one knew where she went. And whenever Eunice was asked, she insisted she'd never been to that part of the hospital. "How could it be me?" Eunice asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I've been right here." I'm not in two places at once." The patients saw her too. At first, they were confused, but then some of them grew anxious. One elderly woman had a particularly unsettling experience. She swore the nurse who had been helping her all week, Eunice, he thought, had come to her room in the middle of the night, whispering to her in a voice that wasn't quite right. But when she told me, Eunice hadn't been anywhere near the room. As the days wore on, staff became increasingly unnerved. The doppelganger seemed to be everywhere, always just out of reach, always just a moment away from being caught. I don't know if the nurse was ever real, or if she was just a figment of our collective minds, a ghost in the halls of an already haunted place. What I do know is this: sometimes in the quietest corners of our minds, we see things that don't make sense, things that don't belong. And no matter how hard we try to convince ourselves, we can never shake the feeling that something is just off. And sometimes, even when you think you're in control, even when you think you know exactly what's going on, there are mysteries that will never be solved. Some things, like the doppelganger nurse, will just remain out of reach. Maybe we weren't meant to understand. Hey, you made it this far, but the story isn't over. The shadows still whisper, and the truth is buried deeper than you think. If you stop now, you'll never know what lurks just beyond the next click. The next story awaits. Watch it now before it watches you. In the quiet of the night, when the hospital was mostly asleep, the air was thick with the sounds of machines humming and the occasional shuffle of footsteps in the halls. It was a time when the world outside seemed far away, and everything in here felt muted. The rooms, the patients, the routines, they all blended together in a soft, steady rhythm. But then there was Jacob. Jacob had been with us for a while, a man of few words, always quiet, always withdrawn. He didn't speak much. In fact, he rarely spoke at all. He would sit by the window, staring out at the streetlights, his expression distant, almost as if he were locked in a world of his own. His doctors had tried everything: therapy, medication, even a few alternative treatments, but nothing seemed to change the fact that Jacob had shut down. He didn't engage with anyone, not with the staff, not with other patients. He simply existed. I'd gotten used to his silence. I'd even grown a little protective over him. There was something about Jacob that made you want to look out for him, something fragile, like a bird with a broken wing. He didn't seem dangerous, but there was a sadness in him that no one could touch. But one night, everything changed. It was about 3 a.m. when it started. I remember the time because I was doing my rounds and the hallways were still and quiet. Most of the patients were asleep, and the staff was tucked away in their breaks. I passed by Jacob's room and I noticed something strange. The door was slightly ajar, and the light inside flickered in a way that made me pause. I stepped inside, and that's when I heard it. The laughter. It was soft at first, a low chuckle, but it didn't sound like the kind of laughter you'd expect from a person. It was disjointed, almost manic, like someone was forcing it out, or like it was coming from a place too deep to reach. I froze for a moment, unsure of what I was hearing. When I looked over at Jacob, I saw him sitting up in his bed, his head tilted back, his mouth wide open, laughing uncontrollably. It wasn't the kind of laughter you'd expect from someone who was happy or amused. It was eerie, almost unsettling. "Jacob?" I called out, my voice cutting through the tension in the room. "Jacob, what's wrong?" He didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on something in the corner of the room, his body trembling with each laugh, but the laughter itself was hollow, empty. It didn't match the situation. Nothing was funny. Nothing had changed. The room was as it had been for hours. I stepped closer, trying to get his attention. "Jacob, stop! What's going on?" He didn't look at me. His gaze remained fixed on that same corner, as though something or someone was standing there just out of my sight. And then, in the middle of his hysterical laughter, he spoke. His voice was quiet, almost a whisper, but there was no mistaking the intensity behind it. "He's standing right behind you." I felt a chill sweep over me, and the hair on the back of my neck prickled. I turned, instinctively, as if expecting to see someone there. But the room was empty. It was just me and Jacob, alone. I looked back at him, my heart pounding. He was still laughing, the sound echoing in the small room, but there was a wildness in his eyes that I had never seen before. "Jacob," I said, trying to remain calm, trying to find a rational explanation. "Who are you talking about? Who's behind me?" He didn't answer. His laughter slowed for just a moment, but then it picked up again, louder this time, as though something was making him laugh against his will. I backed away from him, my eyes darting around the room again. There was nothing. No figure, no shadow, nothing at all that could explain his words. But the feeling in the room had shifted. It felt heavy, thick with something I couldn't quite name. "Jacob," I repeated, my voice shaking. "Please, tell me what you see. Who is behind me?" For a long moment, Jacob didn't say anything. His laughter faded, but the tension in his face remained. And then, in a voice so low I could barely hear it, he said something that sent a shiver down my spine. "He's always here. He's always behind me." I didn't know what to do. I didn't know how to respond. I wanted to comfort him, to ease his fear, but I was scared too. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it. Had Jacob had a break? Was it the medication? Or had something else taken hold of him? But his words kept echoing in my mind. "He's always here. He's always behind me." I called for backup. Within minutes, the doctor was there, along with 2 more nurses. They tried to calm Jacob, but no one could explain what was happening. His laughter died down slowly, but he remained fixated on the corner of the room, his body stiff, his eyes wide open, as if he were trapped in a world we couldn't see. The rest of the night was a blur. We kept him under observation, but after that, he didn't speak a word. He just sat there, staring into the empty corner of his room, as though waiting for something or someone to return. In the days that followed, we did everything we could to help him. Therapy sessions, medication adjustments. But the strange thing was, no matter how much we tried to help, Jacob never spoke again. He didn't laugh, didn't make a sound. He just sat quietly in his room, staring at the corner as if waiting for someone to step out from the shadows. I don't know what happened that night. I don't know what Jacob saw or who or what was behind me. I tried to convince myself that it was a product of his mental state, maybe a hallucination or a result of the medication. But part of me will never be able to forget that moment. The way he looked at me, the way he laughed, the way he said those words, "He's standing right behind you." Maybe there are things we're not meant to understand. Maybe some nights in the quiet corners of our minds, we see things that others can't. And maybe Jacob wasn't the only one who saw it. Hospitals are strange places in their own way. They hold so much: life, death, pain, hope, all coexisting under one roof. We see things every day that many people never have to face: the struggles, the comebacks, and the heartbreaks. But there are moments in this place, moments you can't explain, that make even the most seasoned nurse stop in their tracks. I never thought I'd be one of those nurses, the kind that would hesitate at a door, that would feel a chill run through their spine for reasons they couldn't name. But there's a room here, room 312, that changed that. Room 312 had been empty for weeks, or at least that's what we told ourselves, but it was never really empty, not in the way you'd expect. It had started with the lights, flickering, a little at first, nothing too alarming, but it seemed to happen just when you were standing by the door, ready to enter. You'd see the lights dim, almost like they were warning you to stay away before they flickered back to life. You'd write it off as a malfunction, bad wiring maybe. But after a while, when the flickers became more frequent, when the timing seemed too precise, you couldn't help but feel uneasy. Then there was the call bell. We had a few patients in that part of the ward, but no one in room 312. Not anymore. The patient who had occupied that bed had passed away several weeks prior, peacefully, we were told. Nothing unusual about it. But that damn call bell, it would ring at random times, usually when no one was around. It would ring and ring, insistent, like someone on the other side was trying to get your attention. But when you'd rush in to check, the room was always silent. No one there. The bell would stop the moment you opened the door, like it had been waiting for you. At first, the newer nurses thought it was a prank. One of them, Lori, a sweet but easily spooked rookie, was the first to enter the room alone after hearing the bell ring. She was sure it was someone playing a trick. She thought maybe a cleaning staff member had left it on and forgotten about it. But when she entered, the lights flickered. Not just a quick flicker, but a long, deliberate blink, like the room was trying to tell her something. She froze in the doorway for a moment, her eyes darting around. I'm sure I heard it," she told me later. The bell, and then the light. It was like someone was standing there watching. She never entered that room again. But it wasn't just Lori. More nurses began to report strange things. Objects moving on their own. A chair in the corner which no one had touched would suddenly be pushed back, as if someone had just stood up and walked away. A book on the side table, left untouched for days, would be open one morning when you came in, as though it had been read. Little things you could dismiss if you were looking for an explanation. But it was always the same. No one had been in the room, no one had touched the objects, no one had moved anything. I'll never forget the day it happened to me. It was late, around 2 a.m. I was on my rounds, just trying to finish up the night shift so I could go home. I'd passed by room 312 a few times, like I always did. Nothing unusual, but this time, the door was slightly ajar. The lights flickered as I passed. It was subtle, just enough to make me pause, but I kept walking. It wasn't the first time I'd seen it. But then the bell rang. I stopped dead in my tracks. It was soft at first, a low ringing like someone was calling out for help. My first instinct was to rush in, check on any patients in the surrounding rooms, make sure everything was all right. But I found myself standing there, frozen in place. Something about the sound, something about the way the bell rang, made me hesitate. Who could be in there? I had to know. I had no choice. I walked toward the door, slowly, cautiously. The flickering light caught my eye again, and for a moment I thought I saw something, just a shadow maybe, but it was enough to make my heart race. I opened the door. The room was empty, completely empty, but there was something in the air, something that felt wrong. The call bell had stopped ringing, but the silence felt oppressive. I glanced around, and that's when I saw it. A small object on the floor, a medication bottle that had been neatly placed on the bedside table just hours before. Now it was lying on the floor, rolled a few feet away. I reached down to pick it up, my mind racing. How had it gotten there? I was sure it hadn't been moved. I stood up, scanning the room. The chair was still in the same spot, but the bed, no one had been in it, not for weeks. But it felt warm, like someone had just gotten out of it. The sheets were perfectly still, but there was something unsettling about the room's stillness. I looked over my shoulder, my gut telling me to leave, but I didn't. I stayed. I don't know how long I stood there. It felt like minutes, maybe hours. The air in the room was thick, heavier than the air in the hallway, and then, as if on cue, the bell rang again. I spun around, but nothing had changed. The room was still empty, still silent. I don't know what made me stay that night. I don't know what I was expecting to find, but I could feel it then, the sensation that something was there, that I wasn't alone in that room. The next day I found myself at the nurse's station, unwilling to go near that room again. Lori was there too. We didn't say anything at first. We both just stared at the computer screen, trying to pretend we hadn't just experienced the same thing. But then, after a long pause, she whispered, "Did you hear it last night?" I nodded, unable to say anything. The bell, the strange stillness, the feeling of being watched. After that, we both made a quiet pact. No one was to enter room 312 alone. Not ever again. The strange things didn't stop, the flickering lights, the call bell, the objects that moved on their own. But no one would talk about it. No one would admit to being afraid. We didn't want to confront it. We didn't want to know what was really happening in that room. All we knew was that after the patient had passed away, after the bed was empty, something was left behind, something we couldn't explain. And sometimes late at night, when the halls were still and the air was thick with silence, you'd hear the bell again, ringing and ringing, as if someone somewhere was still waiting for someone to answer. Maybe the room wasn't as empty as we thought. Within the walls of a hospital, lives can be altered forever. Some leave unchanged, while others are left with a new reality, for better or for worse. You learn to expect the unexpected, but sometimes even the most seasoned nurse gets caught off guard. That's what happened to me. Caught in the web of something I couldn't explain, something that made me question what I thought I knew about this place. It started quietly, almost unnoticed. My shifts had been long, like they usually were, but there was one patient who made my shifts feel different. His name was Thomas. He had been admitted to the ward for a few weeks, a young man in his late 20s, struggling with severe anxiety and hallucinations. But despite his outward condition, he never struck me as dangerous. Quiet, withdrawn, often staring out of the window for hours on end. He didn't say much. In fact, he rarely spoke at all. I had seen him a few times in passing, just another patient in the ward. But something about him began to stand out. Not in a way that made me uneasy at first, but more in the way that a puzzle slowly begins to reveal its pieces. Every time I entered his room to check on him, something would catch my eye, something that hadn't been there the night before. It started with the wall, a small scribble, barely noticeable at first. At first glance, I thought it was just a smudge, but when I looked closer, I realized it wasn't a mark. It was writing. Tiny, hurried strokes, as though someone had taken a pen and written quickly in the corner where no one would notice. At first, I brushed it off. Just a mistake. Maybe the patient had done it in a moment of confusion. I didn't think much of it, but the next day, I saw it again. Same spot. Same scribbled letters. My name. It was just a few letters, hastily written in black ink. Grace. I didn't say anything at first. I thought maybe it was some sort of delusion. Maybe Thomas had been trying to communicate, but in his state, this was the only way he could express it, scribbling on the walls like a child. I tried to dismiss it, but it nagged at me. Why my name? How did he even know it? I tried to forget about it, but the next day, when I walked into Thomas's room, The scribbling was there again. Only this time it was bigger, bolder, almost as if it was demanding my attention. Grace. It was written across the wall now, the letters jagged and uneven, stretching across the plaster in a way that made my heart race. The pen strokes looked frantic, as if whoever had written it was in a hurry, as if it was important. I looked around the room. Thomas was sitting by the window, staring out as usual, not reacting at all. It didn't make sense. He wasn't even looking at the wall. So how could he have written my name? How did he know it? Thomas? I called out gently, stepping closer to the bed. He turned his head slowly, those dark eyes locking onto mine. There was something in his gaze, something distant yet intense. I could feel the hairs on the back of my neck rise as I stood there, watching him. "Why are you writing my name on the wall?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He didn't respond right away. Instead, he just smiled at me, this strange, unsettling smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. And then, in a soft voice, he said, "You'll see soon enough." I don't know why, but those words sent a chill through me. I thought I was just being paranoid, maybe overreacting. I'd seen patients say odd things before, things that didn't make sense. But there was something about Thomas's voice that lingered, something that gnawed at the edge of my thoughts, even as I left his room that day. The next few shifts came and went. I kept an eye on Thomas, still unsure what to make of his behavior. The scribbles continued to appear on the wall. It wasn't just my name anymore. There were more words, more symbols, scratches in the paint, little messages that seemed to change with each passing day. At times they were indecipherable, a jumbled mess of letters and numbers. But sometimes there were messages that felt too specific. I couldn't bring myself to ignore it. It felt like a puzzle I had to solve. One evening, after a particularly long shift, I walked into Thomas's room once more. And there it was. The scribbling was different this time. It wasn't just my name. It was a full sentence, written so frantically that the ink had smeared in places. "You'll be next." I froze in the doorway. My pulse quickened. Thomas was sitting in the same spot, his back to me. But something was off. The room felt colder than usual. The lights flickered for a brief moment, and then, as if on cue, Thomas turned slowly towards me. His face was expressionless, but his eyes were wide open, almost too wide, and that smile, it was still there like a mask he wore. "Why?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why are you doing this?" His response was a soft, chilling whisper, "You'll see soon enough." I didn't sleep that night. I couldn't. I kept replaying his words over and over in my mind. "You'll see soon enough." It felt like a warning, like I was missing something, like I was about to be part of something I couldn't escape. I didn't know what to do. Was I just being paranoid? Was this just a part of Thomas's illness? Or was there something else at play here? The next morning, I came in to start my shift, and something had changed. The room felt different. The air was thick, almost suffocating. I walked to the door, my hand hovering over the handle, unsure whether I was ready to see what awaited me inside. I opened the door. Thomas was gone. The room was empty. But that wasn't what took my breath away. What stopped me dead in my tracks was the wall. The scribbling was gone. In its place, there was a single perfect message. "Grace, your turn." I don't know how long I stood there, staring at it. I didn't know what to think. I didn't know what it meant, but I could feel it now. The same eerie presence that had followed me all these days. Something I couldn't shake. Something that had been there all along. I left the room, and for the first time in years, I felt the weight of the hospital pressed down on me in a way I couldn't ignore. The hallway felt longer than usual. The air felt heavier, and I don't know what's coming next. I don't know if I'll ever know. But I can't help but wonder, was it a warning, or was it something worse? All I know is that no matter where I go, no matter how far I run, I will never forget the way Thomas looked at me that day. I will never forget the way he said, "You'll see soon enough."